Pretty sure it's my job.
Oh, that happened the other day on Twitter. Somebody asked him, "Do you even know who Daniel Ricciardo is?"
No.
And Sean just replied with a screenshot of the grandstand of him and Danny Ricciardo on TV together, and that was his reply. It was brilliant.
That's amazing.
So
That's amazing.
It was too easy. I couldn't resist it. I was trying so hard, and in the end, I was like, "No, screw it. We're doing it. We're doing this."
I'm Christina.
I'm Caroline.
And this is Gravel Trap F1.
Have you ever wondered where the commentators on an F1 broadcast get all those fun statistics during each race?
I've always wondered that.
Well, this week we interview the man behind that curtain, Sean Kelly.
Otherwise known as Virtual Statman.
There's probably no better source of information about F1 history on the tip of their tongue.
We discuss all the juicy statistics behind some of Formula One's biggest moments.
Like who has the longest gap between their first podium and their last podium?
Which used to be Michael Schumacher, but is now Fernando Alonso.
We had such a blast talking with Sean that this episode will be quite a bit longer than our usual, though.
But trust us, it's absolutely worth it.
Well, do you want me to save that for when we're going? Because I don't want to talk your ear off before we start.
Oh, it's recording.
We're going.
Unless we have
going.
started.
We're going. I think I followed you on Twitter for at least well over a year, if not 2 years now, and I've really enjoyed a lot of the data you put out. But selfishly, part of the reason that I wanted to have you on the show was to know what exactly is your job in F1 and how did you get into it?
What do I do in Formula One? Well, that's one of life's great mysteries, indeed. So I am in charge of all of, basically in charge of all of Formula One's broadcast stats content. So when you hear a commentator say, this has not happened since such and such a race. If he does this, it'll be an all-time record. If this happens, then this will happen. All these sorts of things. I write all of that material for the broadcasters. I prepare it in advance and I provide it live as we go along because they use a system called Virtual Statman, which is the origin of the handle that I use on social media. A horrible name to be introduced as, by the way. I think it's a terrible name. Like, I hate when I'm at a track and they say, please say, can you put your hands together for the Virtual Statman? And I think, I'm here. I'm the actual Statman. I'm actually here. Yeah. I'm not virtual. Virtual Statman is the thing that I operate. That's like saying, Lewis Hamilton does an appearance. Please say hello to racing car. No, that's not me. That's the thing that I operate.
That's a good point.
Anyway, that's unfortunately is how I seem to be known. I'm typecast as Virtual Statman. But see, your cat is approving of my job description.
He's in a mood today, but yes.
Well, cats are always a mood, aren't they? That's what I've become known for in Formula One. So a lot of the things you hear and will see from social media kind of diffuses outwards from what we put to air, which means no pressure. I have to come up with that stuff. And it's not just the broadcasters these days. I mean, Formula One's social media department uses a lot of it. 2 of the Formula One teams actually use me for their comms department. They just outsource the statistical content to me. And I also write some of the stuff that you see in the race programs that you can buy at the track. And then I also appear on the stage because I also can do this stuff live in front of the audience, both before and after a session. And they've lately realized that, well, why don't we get him to actually interview people as well? Because he really, really knows what he's talking about, allegedly. So I think as much as anything, someone works out in the finance department, wow, he can talk and talk and talk, and he's $100,000 cheaper than Jensen Button. He's hired.
That's amazing.
So that in a nutshell is what I do.
So do you have a photographic memory to remember all of these?
I wish I had a photographic memory, because if I did, I wouldn't be doing this job. I would have made it to Las Vegas a lot earlier than this November. I actually don't really have. I don't have as good of a memory as people think I do. I think it's old man's disease a little bit as I've gotten older. But also there's saturation of information because to give you an example, I did probably 20 hours of research, actual studying research, not 20 hours elapsed time, but 20 hours of actual work for Hungary this weekend. And then you'll do the same thing again for Belgium. So there's so much to go through that by the time I've actually finished and I submit it to the broadcasters, I can't remember half of the stuff that's in it. I had to actually sit down and read my own work again to realize, oh, okay, that's an interesting stat. I don't remember writing it, but it's in there, so I must have done. And then quite a lot of the time, I'll read it and go, that can't be right. That doesn't. I've completely lost it. There's no way that's right. And then I'll go and check it and be like, oh, it is. Blimey. Okay, I guess I can keep my job for another week. So it gets increasingly difficult to remember everything. But half of my job, in fact, the majority of my job is not can you remember it. It's can you find it in less than 5 seconds? We're on live television. And that's probably why I'm considered so useful within live television is that, it's bang. Okay, yeah, here it is. Boom. Okay, Hamilton's out in Q1. All right, well, here's all the instances of Q1 that he's been out in the last 10 years. And, here's what he does when he's out in Q1 in the race and blah, blah, blah. So it can all instantly appear on their screen in the commentary box. There you go. There's your talking points vis-a-vis whatever has just happened in Q1. So that's why I'm still around, I guess, 20 years into it. 20 years after I talked my way into Formula One, as audacious as I was, hiding my age down the telephone, pretending I was older. Yep. Yeah, I didn't want them to know I was 22 when I started because I
pulled a Mila Kunis.
I figured that they'd never hire me if they knew how young I was, because I thought, I don't know any other 22-year-old who knows this depth of knowledge. I certainly wouldn't hire me. So I can't convince them on that basis. So I remember giving a long, meandering sort of word salad about the revisions to the Watkins Glen circuit before 1971, because I wanted them to think that I was old enough to know that when it happened.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, worked out quite well, and I got hired. Partly not on that basis, but it was kind of just a subtle mind control. Actually, when Frank Wilson, who was the coordinating producer at Speed Channel, who was the very first network who hired me, when he eventually met me, he actually thought I was the son of the person he had hired.
No way.
He said I got this. He said I said I got this close to saying, "Hey kid, where's your dad?"
Oh my goodness!
So it worked.
Oh, so did you cold call them and just say?
Yes, I did. Yeah, it took me a couple of days. I had
to.
Yeah, it was after Suzuka 02. Michael Schumacher just won yet another snooze fest, 11th win of the year.
We don't know anything about that. Yet
again, no. I mean, that never happens these days, does it? And I had, and kept everybody in the room awake by giving, Sean Kelly's talk about memory lane back in my day. Which, bear in mind, I was 22. Back in my day, when I was 8, talking about the McLarens of Senna and Prost, and everyone had always said, like, why don't you try and get a job doing something in Formula One? I mean, you very clearly know what you're talking about. And I used to sort of dismiss it and think, well, I don't really think that's feasible. I mean, who really makes money doing that? And then eventually I thought, well, I haven't actually got any money now. So the worst that can happen is they say no, and I haven't actually lost anything. So I called. I had an American girlfriend at the time who lived in Arizona, and so I called Fox Sports in Arizona because I knew Fox was the parent company of Speed Channel. I couldn't find Speed Channel's numbers. Bearing in mind this was the early days of the internet, this wasn't stuff you could find quite easily. So I called Fox Sports in Arizona. They put me through to Fox Sports in California, which is the head office of Fox Sports. They put me through to Speed Channel's corporate office in Los Angeles, who in turn put me through to Speed Channel's production office, which was in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I called and said, hello, could I speak to the Formula One producer, please? And the receptionist said, certainly, who should I say is calling? And I said, tell them it's Sean Kelly, and they're expecting me. No idea. No idea.
Oh my God.
I don't know who these people are. I've never spoken to them before in my life. They're certainly not expecting to hear from me. They have no idea.
They'd be embarrassed that they didn't remember Sean's calling.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what are you guys playing at? And I went through to the aforementioned Frank Williams voice. Frank Williams, honestly, the amount of times I said Frank Williams instead of Frank Wilson is unbelievable in my career. Frank Wilson's voicemail. And I can't remember what I said, but it would have been something along the lines of, hey, I think I might be able to do a job for you researching. And I played the odds because I thought, I bet Speed Channel don't get that type of phone call about Formula One as much as, say, ITV would in the United Kingdom. So I thought, percentages, they're much less likely to get that phone call in the US. So I'm going to call the US broadcaster. So, I guess I was playing the percentages even before I actually got the job. And I think eventually Frank acquiesced to the idea a month before Melbourne 03. So it's February of 03. So I spent months calling him and nagging him about it. And I think as much as anything, he actually said, I'll hire you, but we can't pay you very much, only like 200. And I, at the other end, thinking, yeah, that's fine. Because I'm thinking, well, that's 200 more than I've got now.
That's right.
And I put the phone down and I thought to myself, did he mean 200 a race or 200 for the year? I didn't actually ask what he meant, and he never clarified. He might have meant $200 for the whole year. And I honestly think that he offered me that money just to get me to stop calling him. I think he thought, like, if I just give this guy some dollars, he'll go away and he might produce something that's vaguely useful to us. Who knows? We'll see what happens. But once I got that opportunity, I thought, well, the first thing I thought was terror, because I had no idea.
Now you have to do it.
Yeah, now you have to do it. Now you think, right, this is it. Now this is shit or get off the pot. This is the moment of truth.
Yeah.
Do you actually know anything about what you're talking about, or are you just a fraud who's been living a lie your whole life? I didn't know what format they wanted. I didn't know how many pages it was supposed to be. I didn't know what, did you want it as a PDF? Do you want it as a Word document? Do you want it as an Excel file? There was no brief. I had to make the whole thing up. And a lot of the stuff that we use in Formula One now across sort of industry standard came from the brainstorm session of February 2003, when I thought, what do I think they should use? Because there was nothing to go on. So I thought, well, I think the format should be this. And most of the format, I'd say about 80% of the format we use to this day, came from that period of terror. I thought, I've really got to do this properly. And fortuitously, this is where luck really came into it. I came in at the start of 03, and that was the year when Alonso started at Renault and Raikkonen won his first race as well. So we had Raikkonen and Alonso. That was the year they won their first Grand Prix, and Alonso was on pole in the second race I did in Malaysia, and Raikkonen won the race. It was Raikkonen's first win. So all of a sudden, there was all of these record-breaking age stats to lean on. Schumacher wasn't winning races. That was another thing. And it seemed like, wow, there's so much happening and this guy is on top of everything. When in reality, if I'd come in 2002, it would have been, okay, another Schumacher win. What should we talk about?
Yeah.
And I guess I'm being tested like that right now in 2023 with Max Verstappen. Even though it's dominant, there are things that we can talk about. The fact that Red Bull are going for the all-time record for consecutive race wins this weekend. Verstappen is trying to tie the record for consecutive wins from pole position. I think he has the fourth longest streak for podium finishes. There's a lot that he's actually been doing. So even though it's boring to some, it is also record-breaking to others. So that's the eye of the beholder sort of stuff. Or maybe I'm just the eternal optimist.
No, that's amazing.
You're talking a lot about like the format that you sort things through for the race weekend. But whenever I see those stats out, I'd always assumed that there was this like just magical database that had been built up where each year in each race, all of these numbers were sorted. But you're talking about doing research. So is it just each race weekend going out and getting information? No big like holy Bible database? Well,
most people can access the actual race results and stats. If you go to Forex, which is part of, Autosport subscription, I think still, it's in the public domain. It's for a small fee. You can access the entire motorsport database. So that in itself is not something I offer. because that's something you can get very cheaply. The thing is that you need to actually turn it into something that we can use in a broadcast. I could bore you to death with raw numbers, and you will be bored to death. But if I could cross-reference it with something that Jim Clark did or Juan Manuel Fangio did, then it becomes interesting. Say, for instance, a good example, Max Verstappen this weekend, if he gets into a battle with Lewis Hamilton for the race victory, there's an added little bit for numerologists this weekend, because Hamilton will be trying to prevent Verstappen winning his 44th race. That's Hamilton's lucky number, of course. So you see, if we get into that situation, you've kind of got that in the pocket. Like, ooh, okay, can Hamilton, of all people, stop Verstappen winning number 44? So little things like that. You try and cover what you think is likely, but then there's a few other things you keep in your back pocket just in case things get a bit unorthodox. So you don't really want to just give them raw numbers. You don't want to say, oh, Verstappen's just won his bloody blah race, but if you can say to them, well, that's as many as Ayrton Senna scored in his entire career, and Verstappen's only taken 5 more races to get there. You're like, wow, okay, that's pretty impressive.
Was that you that came up with the one? It was Alonso going for. There was something that came out recently where Alonso was going to get his 30th podium on the 30th race. Or there was this repeated number that came out recently.
The Laura Winter posted about
in Garage 33, 33rd win that weekend.
33% of all races.
That was in the Garage 33 one was in Jeddah, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I just happened to know that because one of the people who oversaw the admin in Jeddah had pointed out to me that, hey, who's in Garage 33? Alonso. The old 33 thing, right? And then the Alonso in Spain, we ran the stat that with him starting in Spain, Alonso had therefore started 1 in 3 of all World Championship races to have ever been held, which starts to make him sound completely prehistoric. Like he was competing when it was still in black and white. Props to him, because he's the only guy left who was on the grid in my first Grand Prix working in F1. He's still here. Me and him have never got our real jobs. We're just going to keep carrying on until we fall off the perch one way or the other.
That's amazing.
So there are a lot of Alonso stats. There are so many because of what he's doing at this age in his career. For the very fact that he is in with a shout of winning a race over the age of 40. Only one race in the last half a century has been won by a driver over the age of 40. Drivers over 40 do not win races. And yet Alonso has been close to doing that on several occasions. And then there's the fact that he is in contention to win or take pole positions 10 years after the last time it happened. That, again, is completely unprecedented. So, there's so many angles on Alonso right now. If he's on the podium this weekend, in fact, if he's on the podium any weekend from now on, he'll break Michael Schumacher's record for time interval between first and last career podium finishes. So every week there's something that Alonso's doing that nobody's done before. So, it's amazing that they got him out the old people's home and back in the car at all, let alone the fact that he's still consistently fantastic. So, there's hope for us old guys yet. Because now I am an old guy. When I started, I was pretending to be an old guy. Now I'm actually the older guy. I knew I was old because when we came out of lockdown in 2020, suddenly I was getting DMs from people saying, "Oh, I want to get into Formula One. You've been in Formula One a long time. Tell me how you do it." I thought, well, okay, this is different now. Now I'm not the new guy. Like now I'm actually like part of the furniture.
Now they're cold calling me.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, okay, at least I know what they're going through when they do this, because I had to do it on the phone. I didn't know any of these people. At least they can sort of psychologically evaluate me on my social media before they dive in. Whereas I was just complete calling. I don't know who this person is. Could be a serial killer for all I know. I have no idea what mood they're going to be in or anything. But we're calling them anyway. We'll see what happens. By the way, that got particularly fun when I started dealing with international networks. So I'd be cold calling German television. So the receptionist would answer in German, and it would sort of be a roulette, potluck, whether or not they actually spoke English or not.
My God.
That got entertaining quite a few times.
So this virtual Statman system, is that something you developed to to comb the database that Christina's talking about, to sort that data to a usable figure?
No, it's not. It's not even that complicated. Honestly, Virtual Statman is just it's nothing more than a glorified chat window. It appears on their screen in the commentary box if they log into it, much like the race control screen. So it's just a series of statements that update in real time as the cars are going around the racetrack. So, if say like Norris leads the first lap at Silverstone. Okay, so this is Norris's first time in the lead since he spun off in Sochi in 21 when it was 3 laps to go and he was winning it. He hasn't led a race since then. This is the first time. So instantly that appears on the screen as soon as Norris gets the lead. So that they've got something to go to there. Okay, wow. Okay, straight out the box, is McLaren are back in the lead of Grand Prix. It's the first time they led the first lap of a Grand Prix since Ricciardo, I think it was. No, that's not true. I'm lying. First time they led the first lap at Silverstone since 2012 or something like that.
Wow.
So, yeah, there's straight away. You as soon as the race starts, you're like, okay, so what are we dealing with here? What's the situation? It's a bit like looking at a chessboard and thinking, okay, so what do we think is interesting here? What's the next move that we're going to be looking at? And it's important to keep it on a need to know basis because you could bombard them with stuff. But that's where the editorial, I guess that's where my editorial influence comes in, because I have to think to myself, if I was actually watching this on television, is this something that I would think was interesting? Because if it isn't, we shouldn't put it out. Because remember, people have come to see the cars go around the racetrack and the battles and all that stuff. They haven't come to listen to a mathematics lecture. So you should always bear in mind, the analogy I've always used in my career is our job is like the ball boy at Wimbledon. If we do our job properly, we actually add to the product you've come to see without you noticing we're there. That's our job. We are not the headline act. We are here to supplement the headline act. So you only want to drop that stuff in when you think it's going to add something to your viewing experience.
So you mentioned that they sometimes will put you behind the mic and they'll put you on the stage. Do you prefer being in backstage, or do you prefer being on stage?
I much prefer being on stage because
that's great.
It's so easy, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't know what all the fuss is about. It's such an easy job. Stand there and say words. I mean, that's not exactly brain surgery. When you spend 3 or 4 days researching a race, that is really dull, really tedious, takes all day and all night, and you end up like this greasy mess, like you haven't showered or anything like that, and you're just sitting there thinking, why is this my job? This is just... I thought this was going to be glamorous doing Formula One. I was just sitting here like eating Pringles and chocolate and getting a bad diet and, finding out the finer details of Yuki Tsunoda's Formula 3 results at this racetrack. And you're just thinking, are we ever going to use this stuff? But then you go out on the stage and then suddenly there's an audience and you can play with the audience. You can make them laugh. You can say, you can go off on a tangent. If somebody shouts out that they're a Lando Norris fan, and you'll mention, oh yeah, let's talk about this. If somebody shouts out that they're a Gasly fan, oh yeah, we'll go this way. So that's much more fun. I mean, I've been lobbying for a while that we should have in Formula One a segment in the pre-race, at least the pre-race. I would also say the post-race that pertains to stats and history, because if you watch like general election coverage, the most interesting part of general election coverage is always whatever person has the big screen and all the data maps and all of that stuff. And then you can sort of reference like, oh, this happens, blah, 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 blah. If this happens, this might happen. And I've said for quite a while now, I said, well, if you have someone who happens to write all that material and is used to being on stage and is very, very quick at being able to come up with this stuff, we can actually utilize elements of the tape library that otherwise never go out. So, it's all very well referencing McLaren in 1988, but that happens a lot with content. It doesn't, if you're just talking about Senna in general or Prost in general, you might use that. But I can remember during lockdown, we did a thing called Virtual Paddock Club. And I had to actually write and produce a 5 or 6 minute segment qualifying and the race every weekend, which I would then present in a studio from my house and I'd have a clicker in one hand, like a weatherman's clicker, so I could advance everything
Yeah.
in the presentation as I'm talking live on camera. And then on my right hand, I had the ability to mix between the cameras. So I had full screen of me, full screen of the video reel, and I had picture in picture, and I could switch between three of them. So in my right hand, I was mixing cameras, and in my left hand, I'm advancing the presentation while talking to the camera. So it was quite elaborate.
It's like a one-man show.
Goodness.
Yeah. So I could do all that, but it took me like 5 or 6 hours to come up with this 5 or 6 minutes of content, because I would have to write the script and I had to go and find the tape, and I would do that using F1 TV because obviously they're the rights holder, so they
Right.
just said, oh yeah, just use anything you like because it's we own it anyway. And I would try and use the most obscure stuff. I can recall there was some one week I used Dallara at Imola in 1992. I had to find a B-roll shot of the Dallaras racing at Imola in 1992. Not the Ferraris, but the Dallaras, because I was referencing Ferrari as a customer engine supplier. So I had to go and find shots of Dallara, who were a customer Ferrari supplier a customer Ferrari team in 92. Ferrari never supplied customer engines until 1991. So I thought, great, here we go. I'm gonna blaze them now. I'm gonna use this really, really obscure stuff that they would never, ever, ever, ever use. And you get to see this rarity. This what car is this? I've never heard of this car. I've never heard of this team. I didn't know that Dallara were in F1 at all. So you can start doing weird and wonderful things with it. It's just an excuse to go crazy with the tape library. And my argument is, if someone tunes in an hour and a half before the race starts, they're really going to find that interesting because they're really, really like nerdy super fans if you're tuning in that early. And that's my crowd. So I've been saying for a while now, give them to me. Let me handle them, because it's 5 or 6 minutes of content.
Oh yeah,
for pennies on the dollar compared to, getting a Formula One car on track, like even a classic F1 car, or, going to interview a driver who's, on a helicopter ride or something, all this weird and wonderful stuff. I said, look, you could also do a lot of content with everything you already own. You don't have to pay for it. All you need is a dude who can make that content. And lo and behold, here I am. Hi guys. 20 years experience of doing it. I think I can handle it. So that was a hell of a long way of saying, yes, I prefer being on stage.
Oh, that's amazing. I think about like Toto Wolff and how he has this deal with Harvard, how he's an adjunct professor with them now. They need to bring you in. I feel like you would teach a great masterclass at Harvard.
Well, I tell you what, one of the best compliments I've ever had in my career was in Abu Dhabi last year. And I was hosting all of Shell's guests. And
oh wow,
the brief for the race was talk them through Ferrari's race strategy, keep them interested. Now, as it happened, that race it was obviously Verstappen had already won the title, but it was up for grabs who was going to be second in the Constructors' Championship, whether it was going to be
Checo or Charles.
Hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. I'm getting myself tied in a knot. It was Checo or Charles in the Drivers' Championship. Yes, sorry. So that battle was, ongoing in the race, and our suite overlooked Ferrari's garage. We're on the other side of the racetrack where the main grandstand is, so we could see what the mechanics were doing all the time. And every time I talk about lap time progression and the pit lane deltas and all this stuff, I walk across the suite with my wireless microphone and say, let's see what the mechanics are doing. And they're in the garage. Okay, they're okay right now. They feel like they're confident, blah, blah, blah. I try to make it as tactile as possible because otherwise it sounds like a normal commentary. But when you can actually look with your own eyes into the garage, what's going on? And you'd say to them, on the pit wall, Ferrari are trying to work out what's the best plan of action without me being too condescending and saying, they'll make a balls of it again, guys. Trust me, I've been at loads of these races this year and they'll balls this up. But, you don't want to say that either. But like, they've had a few miscalculations this year, which, in all seriousness shows you that even the best brains in the world can get this wrong. So this is a critical calculation what they're going to do here, how they're going to play it. So I did all that, and Leclerc was second, which is, I'd said before the race, I think that's the best they're going to get out of this. I don't think they're going to catch Max anyway. It's all about second place today. So they got that and everything. And at the end of it, I was approached by the guy who'd been sitting in the front row. Now, the guy who'd been sitting in the front row the whole time, I knew him as soon as he came in, and I thought, oh my God, I can't believe this person sitting in the front row when I had to talk about strategy. And he came over to me afterwards, said, Sean, is it? I thought, oh God, here we go. Yeah. So I just wanted to say, I really, really enjoyed the way you handled all that strategy stuff as it was happening. I thought it was really good how you kept everybody in the back of the room interested in what was happening, because usually they drift off. I said, oh, thank you very much. And he carried on. He said, see, I do university lectures these days, and it really irritates me when people at the back of the room aren't paying attention. So I was really impressed by the way you handled it. And now the person in question was Gordon Murray, who was the designer of the World Championship winning Brabhams in the Bernie Ecclestone era. So I had Gordon Murray in the front row, literally the guy next to the stage, as I'm having to explain how Ferrari's strategy is unfolding. And so at the end, had him come over to me, the first thing I said, which was the biggest fangirl thing I could have done, which was, I went, you're Gordon, aren't you? And then the second thing I said was, would you mind saying that to my bosses over there? Because I really like them to know you just said that. So yeah, I was like, okay, guess I'm not sacked. Because I thought, like, if I, he'll see right through me if I don't know, if I'm not on top of this. He speaks the language around here, so he doesn't need my pointers. So that was one of the best compliments I ever got in my career, and I got a picture with him. That's
incredible.
I was like, yeah, please, give me your email address so I can say, if somebody's hiring me for a job, I can say, go talk to Gordon, he'll tell you.
Yes. Statistically speaking, I do really well in this arena.
Yeah. I do very well when I've got World Championship winning designers sitting right in front of me, expecting me to entertain them and inform them.
Yes. That's awesome. That's amazing.
You mentioned being on stage, and you were recently on camera on the grandstand with Danny Ricciardo and Will Arnett. Now that Danny has a seat, has there been any talk of you taking his spot on the grandstand and being the co-host with Will Arnett?
There hasn't. Although I've had a few sympathetic friends say, does that mean that you're going to be taking Daniel Ricciardo's place? As though the entire world would know who I was compared to Daniel Ricciardo. I have actually worked it into my act, because we got quite a lot of negative reviews after that first episode, and part of the reason was because neither Daniel nor Will had ever anchored live television. I mean, Daniel had never done live TV other than being interviewed, and being interviewed is completely different to actually hosting and anchoring, because you've got to talk while someone else is talking in your ear at the same time, and you've got to understand what they're saying while you're talking, and you mustn't, hesitate or deviate from what you're trying to say. So that's an acquired skill. And Daniel even told us in rehearsal, this is actually more difficult than I thought it was. So we were a little bit underprepared. We probably could have done with, we could have done with that being, I felt like our pilot, like almost like if we'd rehearsed and done that the previous day, like then we would have been cooking by Sunday. So I was actually looking forward to the second show, because I thought, well, now we've got the first one out the way. Now we know what it looks like and what we want it to be. Now we, instead of trying to imagine what it is, now we've seen it and we know what will work and what won't. And second time round will be great. And then, unfortunately for us, Daniel Ricciardo happens to be a very good driver, and Red Bull have, decided that they'd like to put him in the AlphaTauri. Bit of a bummer, unless, of course. Secret plot twist. Daniel Ricciardo does the grandstand while driving in the US Grand Prix. That would bring fan interaction.
Has two voices in his ear.
Yeah, he had me yelling stats at him while he's trying to drive. Imagine that. There was quite a charming moment in that show. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a moment when Marshawn Lynch was on, the NFL player, and Ricciardo. He asked me when was the first time he did a shoey in a race, and I think I said it was Spa, and I knew actually no, I think it was Hockenheim, but I said Spa. And then he said, no, it was a Nürburgring. And I'm sure he was wrong. I'm sure he meant Hockenheim. He thinks it was a Nürburgring, but I think it was Hockenheim. And I said, look, the thing is, I was slightly taken off guard when you asked me, because Max Verstappen's just led his 200th consecutive lap in the lead. And Marshawn Lynch, who'd never watched a Formula One race before, went, whoa, like all today? No. No, not all today. Not that many laps in a Grand Prix. Which awesome. I actually thought was quite charming, because bearing in mind, like, the grandstand's not supposed to be like the Sky broadcast. It's not supposed to be a bunch of industry professionals. It's actually supposed to be the opposite. It's supposed to be a bunch of sort of blokish type people, really, who sort of know Formula One that is out there, but don't know much more than that. So I actually, some people thought Marshawn Lynch sounded dumb when he said that, but I actually thought, well, hang on a minute, the guy's never seen a Grand Prix before. It's like me, It'd be like me asking that question about an NFL game. Like, I don't watch the NFL, so I ask a dumb question, or what seems like a dumb question, but it's actually because I'm actually interested in what you're talking about. So I took it, in the intended spirit of like, I'm not all today, but I am pleased that you're interested enough to ask.
That's awesome.
So in answer to the original question, we don't know what's going to happen yet. And yeah, I mean, I have to wait and see. I don't want to speak for the producers, but I suspect that they are weighing it up themselves. Like, what are we going to do? Because
they could approach DeVries.
Grandstand with Nick DeVries.
Twist the knife.
He could pontificate at length about how he shouldn't have been sacked.
Right.
And I might back him up on that one. I mean, we were sort of thinking of contingencies based on what if Ricciardo had to replace one of the Red Bull drivers on Saturday, because then you got 24 hours before we're on air. We've got no talent.
Yeah.
We also knew that a lot can happen in Formula One in 4 or 5 months, and maybe that Ricciardo would be in a race seat by the time Austin rolled around. So we'll see what happens with it. Personally, I really enjoyed it. I was flattered they called me. Apparently, the conversation went that they said, well, we've got Ricciardo, so we've got the box office guy. We've got Will, who's a famous guy who's recently got into Formula One, is really interested in it, and said that we need one guy who can be very, very quick in making sure they stay on topic and knowing all the facts and figures of it. And apparently more than one person named me as being the person who should do it. So kind of hoping we carry on, because having done the first show, I feel like, no, come on guys, we got to get back out there. We've done the first show and we know what we're doing now. Let's get on.
Okay, as we're talking about the American races, you have both Miami and Vegas. Vegas has some history, but Miami now only has 2 years. How do you prep for races like that, where there's, technically speaking, like no stats about that particular racetrack?
It's not as difficult as you might think, because if you have a racetrack that has no history, then you say, okay, well, what's this driver's record at tracks that have no history? What is their record on their first visit to a racetrack? You go in that direction. You could expand outwards. For instance, Max Verstappen made his car racing debut in Florida. His very first racing car event was in Florida when he drove the Florida Winter Series in 2014, alongside a young gentleman called Will Buxton, who, needless to say, was not as quick as Max Verstappen. But we digress. But yeah, that's where Verstappen's car racing career began. So you can expand outwards from the local area, or you could say, okay, well, what's his record in North America? Does he have a good record in North American races, and so on? So you just keep moving around and chopping and changing it until you find something that's interesting. So yeah, it's actually, I've said many times in my career, if somebody's to a potential employer, I mean, I've said to them, if someone tells you there are no stats, well, you can sack that guy, because there are. You hire us to go and find them. So there are always stats, trust me. I do Formula E as well. I mean, the chief stats go for Formula E, and there have been many racetracks they go to that they've not been to before. And sometimes the team is new. Sometimes the driver is new, that they've not raced in Formula E before. And you can always come up with something. The enemy of the commentator is the blank piece of paper. It's always, when I submit everything, it's always like literally jamming everything onto a page, for each. There's never any blank space. It's always like, okay, I'm gonna have to turn the font size down slightly to get it all in.
Yes. Yes.
You and Caroline were actually on the grid together.
We were?
What's that, sorry?
In Portland? Were we in Portland?
Sean's first time on a race car grid, as he posted on the internet, this is the only reason I know it, I don't keep track of your stats, was at the Portland E-Prix, and you were there too, Caroline.
Sean, I had no idea. Were you there with Formula E?
Yes, I was. Yeah, and I did the circuit PA during the race as well.
Yeah,
with Ryan Myron.
Well, how about that? Well, then I definitely saw you while we were there, because we were there the whole time with Formula E, and it was great.
Yeah, it'd been a while since I'd actually been to a Formula E race. Formula E is a really welcoming environment, and I wish it actually got more hits. I think it gets a lot of unfair criticism for not being Formula One, basically. But no series is Formula One. If you compared everything with Formula One, we wouldn't watch any other forms of motorsport. It's just another kind. And now they're doing 175 past your own eyes. It's just like, oh wow,
yes.
Okay, we're moving now. And we saw some of the accidents in Rome this weekend. Like, wow, okay.
Oh my goodness.
You can start to have big accidents now at these speeds. So they're not playing.
Yeah. You can't say that there's not excitement, because with all of the overtaking and all of the crashes that you see in Formula E, I mean, what else do you want? That's what I tell the Formula One fans when they ask about Formula E. I'm like, you're getting all the excitement and the joy and the speed. You're not getting that same rumble, but I love the research side that Formula E brings into the road cars and how it affects our everyday life and electric vehicles. I mean, I just think that's so cool. But okay, back to statistics, because I do have a question. I saw a headline today about them broadcasting potentially the driver's heart rates during the race. What do you think about that? Do you think that would be a helpful thing for fans to see?
I think it'd be very helpful. It's old technology. This is never brought up ever by anyone, and the reason is obvious. But Ayrton Senna wore a heart rate monitor in 1994 at the Brazilian Grand Prix, and it occurred to me many times thereafter, I'm really glad he wasn't wearing one at Imola, and for obvious reasons. I think that's the reason why the concept disappeared. It just seemed like, I don't know, I feel like we're a little bit near the knuckle with this, what we're doing here. Now it's come back. I mean, I heartily welcome it. I think it's fantastic when you see, okay, for people, anybody who thinks that driving a Formula One car is just a case of steer the wheel, it's nothing like that. It's incredibly physically demanding. And when you can see the heart rate going in the 190s, like, okay, it's no wonder they sound out of breath on the radio when you go around some of these corners. So I'm for anything that helps tell the story. It doesn't, not just, this is what I do with historical reference. There's what AWS does with, here's how quick they are down this car's quickest down the straight in terms of the time gain. This car's quickest in this corner. The track dominance overlay that they do now between two drivers. Here's Verstappen versus Leclerc, and you can see which parts of the lap where Leclerc is quick. That's a really good addition, because now you can really, you don't need to know anything about Formula One or racing to understand. Yeah. Okay, so this part of the track, Leclerc is going to be quicker, and this part of the track, Verstappen is going to be quicker. That, boom, easy. Everyone can understand that. Again, it is technology that is decades old. It's just not been, no one's really wanted to go near it. And I wonder how much the Senna situation in 94 actually influenced that.
Yeah.
In your opinion, Sean, based on the data, what conclusions can we draw about this new formula that we've been on for 2 years now, this whole redesigned car?
Well, overtaking was up last year. I think the number was 32% year on year, 2021 to 2022. So from an overtaking perspective, it was a success. Of course, we had that technical ruling prior to Spa last year, which this was one of those instances where I thought, okay, this is a moment where we see who here has been working in Formula One for a long time. Because at that point, Red Bull were already dominating, or had dominated in recent rounds. Verstappen had just won from 10th in Hungary and so on. And the talk during the rounds was, this technical ruling is going to come out. I bet this is it. This is it now. Red Bull are going to have their advantage eroded. It's going to be a much closer grid. And I said, you're new here, aren't you? You haven't given thought to the fact that it might actually exacerbate Red Bull's advantage and make it bigger. And look what we got at Spa. Verstappen started 14th because of penalties, and he was in the lead by lap 13. That's third fastest climb from that position to lead a Grand Prix in the history of the World Championship. So Red Bull looked untouchable thereafter. So that ruling, whether imagined or not, didn't hurt Red Bull at all. They look pretty good this season as well, on the basis that they haven't lost a Grand Prix. So on that basis, maybe, okay, it's not as close as it was in 2021, but there was no guarantee that if we carried on with those regulations, it would have carried on being that close. You don't know. What we have seen is a surprising concertina of the rest of the grid. The fact that we're only a year and a half into this concept, and in Austria, Q1, all the cars in Q1 separated by 0.858 of a second. That's the closest closest Q1 that we've ever had in the history of Formula One. When all the cars have been on the racetrack in qualifying, it has never been that close. Less than 1 second covering the whole grid. In the 80s, 1 second covered first and second on the grid. In fact, Imola in 1988, Senna was on pole. Nelson Piquet was third on the grid in the Lotus, and he was 3.3 seconds off pole. And he was third on the grid. Now, 0.8 covers everyone. Logan Sargent is 0.8 off the fastest time, and he's bottom of the list. So it has never, ever been closer. So from that perspective, you have to deem the rules to be a big success. From the converse point of view, the cars at low speed look like lumbering turds. They just, they just look like land yachts. They're horrible. They're overweight. They're very, very stiff. So they bounce over the curves and just look horrible at low speed. Yeah, they're great at high speed, but when they go through slow chicanes, they just look appalling. Maybe they didn't factor that in when they considered the rules, but from an overtaking perspective, yes, it is a better formula as far as I'm concerned, and it is a closer formula. But we have one car, not a team right now, but one car right now that is demonstrably better than the rest in race trim. But if you disregard that, it is incredibly close elsewhere. We've had 8 different drivers on the podium in the last 5 races, I think it is. So with the exception of that one guy, Formula One looks in amazing shape. It's just a shame that the one guy is hogging all the race wins. If it wasn't for him, people would be saying, wow, this is an absolute classic of a year. I mean, imagine, who would have thought, if we take Verstappen out of the equation, who would have thought before we started this year that I'd be talking to you about Fernando Alonso potentially winning a race and Lando Norris potentially winning a race.
Right.
So, and then also throw into the mix, casually throw in Russell and Hamilton and Ocon potentially winning a race.
Yes.
Or Piastri, this is amazing stuff. I mean, it really is. But unfortunately, first across the line is always the same guy. So we can kind of use Verstappen having a day off, really. I actually just recorded a podcast earlier today, which I do for The Race, the website, The Race. We do a thing called F1 Focus. And the subject matter today was the earliest that World Championships have been clinched. The reason I brought it up is because this weekend in Hungary, the Friday of this weekend, will be the anniversary of when Michael Schumacher clinched the title in 2002. July the 21st was the day he clinched the title in 2002. So if you think Verstappen's dominating now, again, you've obviously not been here terribly long, because we've seen way, way worse than this.
Because while Michael was doing that, Sean was calling Formula One saying, get me in there.
Yes. And fortuitously, they were in the middle of what you might call Formula One's night shift, when everyone was just trying to stay awake.
Yeah.
And they probably thought, yes, please, God, give us anything you can give us right now to jazz this up.
So with statistics, you can get them to tell whatever story you want. Are you ever tempted to use them, for nefarious, the dark side purposes?
I wouldn't say I'm tempted to use it in that way, because if it's entertaining, it goes in, whether it's positive or negative. For instance, I mean, right now, it's hard not to represent Checo Perez in a negative light. But yet, it is still possible. Consider this, if you will. In the last 2 races, Perez has increased his advantage over Alonso for second in the championship at both races. Even though everyone's getting on his case about not getting to Q3, he has actually extended the lead over Alonso at both races. Now, if I just gave you that in isolation, that sounds very positive. But that is part of my job, because obviously the negative stats about Perez are self-evident right now, but you want to counterbalance it with something that's positive. So if he has a good weekend, you can say, well, on the bright side, Perez recently, although he's been going through a lot, has actually consolidated his advantage in second in the World Championship. And then you can lead off in a positive sense. I always am aware that in my role, there's actually a tremendous amount of soft power to influence the entire narrative of Formula One, because so many people use me that however I word something might have genuine repercussions to a driver's career. It only ever happened once, where I had a mild falling out with a driver's manager about it. And that was, I don't think he'd mind me saying it, it was the manager of Marcus Ericsson. And when Ericsson was in Formula One with Sauber, it was, the stat I'd written was that he'd beaten his teammate Felipe Nasr at a race, despite the fact he employed a 1-stop strategy and Nasr had a 2-stop strategy. The implication was that I was trying to say Ericsson had driven smart and conserved his tires and everything and managed to beat Nasr, even though Nasr was on the faster strategy. But his management thought I was saying Ericsson only beat him because he was on a 1-stopper. So it was a slight misreading of the sentiment. And he flew off the handle at me a little bit. We actually knew each other before, because we worked in TV together. And I said to him, no, you've read it wrong here. I was trying to say that Marcus actually did a good job, because he had to play it technical.
He defied the odds.
And keep everything, keep it going and not get beaten by Nasr, who had all the grip in the world and didn't get past him. And what was quite funny afterwards was that his manager said, he apologized to me, and he said, look, the thing is, you'd be amazed how being a Formula One driver's manager turned you into this paranoid person. And you think everyone's out to get you, because there's so much politics in Formula One that you're convinced that everyone else is there to torpedo the whole thing. So we laughed about it in the end. But I am always aware that you always try and be fair to the driver, and the team. I might poke fun at Ferrari's strategy calls, but you may also counter it by saying, hey, here's the times that they got things right, blah, 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 blah. So, you always want to give both sides of the coin. You very rarely do you just want to say, well, this person's useless. And another good example, I mean, I was one of the only people who defend Nikita Mazepin at Haas, because while everyone else, it became sort of very fashionable to pile on, compared to Mick Schumacher. And I said, I'm sorry, no, there is no way Nikita Mazepin is this slow. There must be something wrong within that car or within that team. Mazepin was a race winner in F2. He qualified on the front row in F2. Mick Schumacher never qualified on the front row in an F2 race. Nikita Mazepin did. So I already knew, there's just no way he's a second slower than Mick Schumacher. No way at all. I know, I get it, he's not the second coming of Tazio Nuvolari. Okay, yeah, fine. But there is no way he's a second slower than Mick Schumacher. And it became fashionable because, he's the Russian guy. He didn't do himself any favors with his attitude, particularly in interviews sometimes. But it's not my job to sort of say, yeah, you're right, he's shit. Why is he doing here? It's not my job to do that. My job is to say, well, hang on a minute. They might have a point here. This might not be paranoia. it might genuinely be a case of, no, something's amiss. So I was one of the few people who, I don't want to say I died on that hill. I wasn't that passionate about the defense, but I was willing to say, based on the numbers, this should not be happening. So yeah, sometimes it can manifest. You try and be impartial. You try and just look at the numbers and say, it really should be this or it should be that. You don't sort of base it on personal opinion. If I like a driver on a personal level or it's their home race or anything, you don't try and favor them. You still just do the same thing every week, and the rest is up to them. I always say, if there's a problem, drive faster. You'd be amazed how quickly the problem goes away.
That's the truth. I'll try not to offend the Canadian in the room. Did you feel like Nicholas Latifi was in a similar boat as Nikita Mazepin, or was his situation different?
Well, Latifi, I used to call him Steady Eddie because Latifi tended to not have the spectacular results of George Russell. That's just the facts. But when the opportunity came along, he could produce the goods. He was just a little bit more erratic. Russell was pretty dependable in terms of being a giant killer, as is Alex Albon in that car now. Latifi less so, but Latifi was the first guy to get the Williams into Q3 last year, and his seventh. When he was seventh in Hungary in 2021, that was the best finish for a Williams in a dry race since 2017. So on the occasions he could produce the goods. Suzuka last year, remember on Friday at Suzuka last year when he took a wrong turn and he ended up looking at a barrier instead of going through the chicane, and everyone poked fun at him for that. In the race, he scored points. In that race where it was torrentially raining, he actually scored. So he went from being this figure of fun on Friday to scoring points for Williams in the race. So he did prove that he had a bit about him. Again, I'm not putting him in league with Verstappen and Hamilton. I'm not saying he's that level of talent, but he also was not, put it this way, I have seen many, many rich kids who didn't have anywhere near the talent of a Latifi, or especially anywhere near the talent of a Lance Stroll, who's a much better driver than people think he is, but he's a poor qualifier and he kind of causes his own problems with that. Although he's out-qualified Alonso twice in the last 3 races, I think it is. Latifi, solid, not embarrassing. Certainly not embarrassing. There are a couple of high-profile incidents. Obviously, there's the Abu Dhabi one, but a couple of incidents where you thought, well, that didn't look great. But there were also moments where you thought, wow, okay, this guy can actually, this guy can pedal this thing. Good for him. And he was an F2 race, and he was an F2 race winner, so he'd gotten pretty good by that point.
Right. Okay, so you mentioned Suzuka last year. Were you on the front lines of the panic when Max Verstappen crossed the line and there was this big question whether or not Charles was going to get that penalty and whether or not it was going to solidify the championship? I'm sorry if I've hit a sore spot.
I do remember that being a rough day.
Is this a video podcast?
Yes. Well, no.
It doesn't have to be.
The listeners need to know that I have my hands over my face right now. I have PTSD remembering that day.
I'm so sorry. You don't have to answer.
So what had happened? Here's the chronology of what happened that day, right? So we knew it was going to be raining. So we'd run through the scenario. Because obviously, when it rains at Suzuka, it really rains. And it would be remiss not to mention that on the date of recording, it is the 8th anniversary of the passing of Jules Bianchi, whose grave I went to visit earlier this evening. So we knew that Suzuka rain can be very serious. So we'd run through all the scenarios beforehand for, okay, so they've changed it post-Spa 2021. Now it's 25%, 50%, 75%. Here's how the points work. And everyone had run through this, not just me, but everyone I work with. So Sky, for instance, had a multitude of full screen graphics explaining the scenarios, blah, blah, blah. And then we had this very, very long red flag. And we thought we might not have a race here because we hadn't done 2 laps. And then eventually we restarted and we do have a race. And literally as the race is ticking off the laps. We're looking at the waypoints along the way. Okay, 25% distance, 50%. We might get to 50%, at which point, we get half points and also the fastest lap bonus. Okay, so that's what we're probably looking at. Now, as it turned out, someone at the FIA had read the regulations in a sort of legal type way, like as a lawyer sort of thing, and said, that's not what the regulation says. It says if the race is stopped and cannot be restarted, the points are given this way. But we've restarted the race. We're not stopping the race. The race will run out to time. So it's not that we've stopped it and can't be restarted it. The race is finishing under the normal circumstances of the time limit. Ergo, in a legal sense, you have to award full points. Now, at some point, this had made its way around all of Formula One's production department. And the camera, some of my friends are cameramen out on the racetrack, and they told me in their ear, they knew at that point late in the race that Leclerc and Perez was effectively a battle to see if Verstappen was going to clinch the championship that day. So they were following it as though, like, this is it now. If Perez gets Leclerc, Verstappen's the champion. Unfortunately, no one had told us. So we were actually doing the race, assuming this is half points. Obviously, Leclerc wants to hold on to second, but it's not the clinching situation. So race finishes. We are almost all of us, under the illusion that it's going to be half points. Title rolls on to the next race. And then Johnny Herbert is told in his ear, as a penalty, Verstappen, that means Verstappen's clinched the title. So Verstappen's told he's world champion. And then, of course, you might remember that in the cool-down room, Verstappen was convinced he hadn't won the title.
Yeah.
And so was everybody else. And I've spoken to other team principals, and they didn't. They all thought it was half point. No one had told us of this legalese reading of the rule book, which unfortunately for us was the correct reading of the rules, because you have to read it in that legal sense.
Yes.
This is what it says. I know what you meant it. I know what you think it means, but this is what it actually says. So unfortunately, the person at the FIA who read the regulations that way was correct. The mistake was no one told us.
Yeah.
So we all looked phenomenally stupid on live TV, that we couldn't get our arse from our elbow and didn't know whether Verstappen was the champion or not. But we were in the same boat as the teams. And I can tell you, I don't want to name names because I work with a lot of broadcasters and a lot of commentators, but I had several messages from some very, very annoyed commentators who felt like they'd been made to look like idiots on live television because they explained for several hours. So this is how it's going to work, folks. Yeah. And then suddenly it's like, oh, wait, no, lol, LOL, Verstappen's champion, thanks for coming. It was like that. So it wasn't the greatest few hours of our broadcast history, unfortunately.
Well, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to bring up old wounds. I didn't think you guys looked stupid. I think we were just all confused. I think everybody was just confused, but I didn't think anybody looked stupid.
Yeah, I think it would have been a lot worse if the teams understood it correctly. If all the teams had been like, well, yeah, what did you think was going to happen? Then we would have looked like real idiots. But if even Red Bull didn't think that Verstappen had won the championship, then that's kind of our get out of jail free cards. Like, look, those are the smartest people here, right? Yeah. We're only doing this. We're only doing this because we're not smart enough to do their job. And if even they thought that it wasn't a 4 points race, then, what are we to do? Because if Red Bull had said, oh, it's definitely a half points race, as broadcasters, we're not going to argue the toss with them. We're not going to say, oh, I'm sorry, Adrian Newey, you're wrong. It's this. You're never, ever going to, no broadcaster is ever going to be that arrogant to talk that way. So if the teams are, I mentioned Frank Wilson earlier, my first boss at Speed Channel, and he always said the mantra, remember, the teams are smarter than us. If the teams say it's this, we should follow them, because even if they're wrong, most of the time they're right. So you're more likely to get more things right by following the team's lead on these things.
That's good advice. That's really good advice. Well, thank you so much for being with us. This has been, dare I say, and I hope I don't insult any of our previous guests, but this might be the best interview we've ever had here at Gravel Trap F1. So thank you so much for joining
It's been
us.
really fun.
It's been so fun.
Everybody else is crap compared to me. I mean, that's basically it. Now. Just going to have to come back next week and extol the virtues of 1980s Grand Prix racing, cross-referencing Pier Carlo Ginzani, and
Amazing.
then making some oblique reference to something that Fernando Alonso did in a race in 2009, while silently insulting half of my Twitter audience. It's great.
It's perfect. It's
Just
perfect.
all in a day's work. And we never mentioned the fact that I'm in Monaco right now, which is a shame because I was looking forward to sliding that humble brag in under the radar, but I never actually got to it.
That you were in the meeting with Toto and Nick DeVries the other day that went viral.
Was I? I might have been. Yeah.
He took the photo.
Yes.